delighted to have you all. Thank you for having this conversation with me. Housing is one of the things that has been really top of mind for me, for the Congress, for all of you for a long time. And I'm so grateful for this discussion. Look, even before COVID hit, and we'll get into that in a second, I was having conversations everywhere in my district about housing insecurity, the lack of affordable housing. Like, we already had a homelessness crisis everywhere in the 8th district, even before COVID. And I know that sometimes when people in our state think about homelessness, their heads immediately go to Seattle. But we have homelessness in Wenatchee. We have it in Kittitas. Kittitas did a very innovative thing with their tax base, where they created a fund to help with homelessness. But this is a concern everywhere. And now, in the wake of COVID, it has become that much more of a concern. We had, right from the start, a moratorium on evictions, which is a great stopgap measure, but it does not solve the problem by any stretch. I mean, it was really meant to be there for a month, maybe 2 months, until we could get a real solution, whether that's vouchers or rental assistance, homeowners assistance, you name it. But the situation that we're in now, and now Governor Inslee has independently extended the moratorium on evictions all the way till the end of the year. And the situation we're in now is that this is just untenable. I mean, who on this chat could come up with all in one lump sum 8 months, 9 months, 10 months or more of rent? And so in many ways, while the moratorium keeps people in their homes in the midst of this pandemic, it may well end up leaving us with a wave of homelessness that hits as soon as that moratorium ends. And all along the way, we have landlords who are not getting paid and who may lose their properties because the whole cycle is not working. And so all along, what I've wanted to see is rental assistance, which we put in the CARES Act, in various forms, community development block grants, and that way, so that could get out from the state to localities to help, and that's what my guests will be talking about today. We also, in the HEROES Act, had specific rental and homeowners aid to help people stay in, but also to make sure that landlords would get paid, because there's two parties here, and we just need to make sure that we keep people in homes and that those homes continue to exist. So with that, I would love to introduce my guests today, and then I'm going to throw some questions out. I'm just going to name you all off, and then I'll let you introduce yourselves. So in our discussion today, we have Ted Kelleher, who is the current Senior Managing Director of the Housing Assistance Unit with the Washington State Department of Commerce. And he's been with the Department of Commerce since 1994. And so he brings with him a wealth of knowledge, and we will be tapping into that today. We also have Alicia McCray. She's the Executive Director of the Housing Authority of Chelan County and the City of Wenatchee. She's been with the agency since 1990, a lot of changes since then. And during this time, the Housing Authority has expanded its portfolio from 70 units within the city limits of Wenatchee to 500 units covering both Chelan and Douglas counties. And the Housing Authority also broadened its scope of service from focusing before specifically on agricultural workers to now include seniors, the disabled and low-income families, trying to give everybody some help. And this is part of Our Valleys, Our Futures as well. I'm sure there's a lot of overlap there. We also have Rachel Myers. She is the Executive Director with Washington Low Income Housing Alliance. She has over 12 years of work experience with the Housing Alliance. We're eager to hear from her. And Denise Rodriguez, she's the Executive Director of the Washington Home Ownership Resource Center. So Denise joined the team as its first Deputy Director in April of 2015 and has now been Executive Director since February of 2019. Just in time to get hit with the craziness of COVID. Denise has worked to provide financial empowerment, and particularly in the areas of access to financial services and security and housing stability. So I'm going to have my guests introduce themselves. I'll go in reverse order and just start with Denise. Would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself? And then we'll go to Rachel, Alicia, and Ted.
Helps if I unmute myself. Yes, well, thank you. That was a lovely introduction. I just want to say thanks for inviting me to participate in the panel. Washington Homeownership Resource Center is a statewide nonprofit organization that offers information and referral to both home buyers, typically low and moderate income home buyers who are looking for different supports that will help them achieve the dream of home ownership, and also provide that same information and referral service to homeowners in distress to help them connect to the resources out there to help them increase the likelihood that they are able to resolve their issues and stay in their home. So we do all of this through a statewide toll-free hotline. Everything is either by phone. We also have an online service portal, so they could do that online. And we are there generally during regular business hours and can help people connect to those resources. We've been around since about 1995, and since 2011, when the Foreclosure Fairness Act passed in Washington and created a hotline statewide, we've been operating and managing that hotline.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for being with us. We'll have some questions for you, Denise. Rachel, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you. Well, I'm glad to be here. I'm Rachel Myers, and I'm the Executive Director, like you said, of the Washington Low-Income Housing Alliance. The Housing Alliance is a statewide member-based organization that does advocacy and public policy change to ensure that everyone in Washington can live in a safe, healthy, affordable home. We have over 140 organizational members across the state. Most of those are housing providers and homelessness service providers. And we also do a lot of community organizing because we need, the good ideas and the policy expertise. But as you all know, to make real change, we need grassroots organizing, and we need people in districts and in legislative districts and in communities across the state speaking up. So we mobilize every year many thousands of people to reach out to elected leaders to make sure that affordable housing and homelessness is on their radar for top priorities. And then we also have a community organizing project that works with people who are directly impacted by homelessness and housing instability. It's called the Resident Action Project, because we know that the best solutions are developed when the people who are most impacted are part of those solutions. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. Alicia.
Hi, thank you. Thank you to you, Congresswoman, and to your staff for inviting me. It's nice to speak on behalf of our little corner of your district here. The Housing Authority, as the Congresswoman said, my name is Alicia McCrae, and I am with the Housing Authority of Chelan County and the City of Wenatchee. We serve both Chelan and Douglas County, and we have affordable rental housing for seniors, disabled, agricultural families, and low-income families. We also administer the Housing Choice Voucher Section 8 program, and within that program we have a family self-sufficiency program, a home ownership program, and we have 75 vouchers dedicated for veterans through the VASH program. So that's what we do. Thank you.
That's fantastic. And I'll come back to this later in questions, but I'm going to want to know more about the home ownership program focused on low-income communities, because I believe, and you can set me straight on this if I'm wrong, but this is one of the ways that you close the gap. It's one of the ways for racial equity as well. It was redlining policies decades ago that have resulted in the lack of ability to accumulate wealth over the years that has then kind of resulted in a cycle of economic despair. And so I would love to hear more about that. Okay, but I'm going to turn it over first to Ted. Let's hear from you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting us, Congresswoman, the Department of Commerce. Again, I'm Ted Kelleher, Washington State Department of Commerce. I manage housing assistance. The department is involved in lots of activities that are connected to housing, like land use and obviously jobs, or connection incomes to pay mortgages and rents. The Housing Trust Fund, where we do capital construction around the state. The specific thing about housing assistance that I'm mostly involved in is primarily homeless assistance that's provided to counties. So we work with county governments. It's a very flexible funding, and then using that to add performance measurement into the system as a whole, not just the state funding, and transparency, and then put it all on the website so everyone can see how the money's getting used project by project, what the outcomes are, trying to just hone the efficiency of what resources we have to reduce the number of people living outside. Do you want me to just start up with the COVID response piece at this point?
Sure, I'd love that.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Congresswoman, for your involvement with the CARES Act. You know, right out of the gate in March, we were able to reprogram some of our existing resources using the flexibility we had to get out there, but it was only $30 million. And when you look at the size of the fallout from the pandemic and then the economic dislocation, it's so much larger than that. You know, it's hard to make a good estimation, but it depends on the assumptions you use, but it's between, you know, it's about $100 million a month in unpaid rent due to the pandemic. Could be plus or minus 50% depending on what assumptions you use, but it's a very large amount of money. So without the CARES Act, and thank you for supporting, we wouldn't be able to do what we're doing now. We were able to use $100 million of that CARES Act to provide the emergency rent assistance program, which is now operating around the state. We're really hoping with the HEROES Act can come through, because that $100 million is significant and it stood up everywhere. But based on where we're going, that's going to run out in a matter of weeks or a month. Certainly won't last past the end of the year. So we're really hoping that we can build on the experience with the Emergency Rent Assistance Program, build that infrastructure that the counties have been working with their local nonprofit providers and the buy-in for organizations that work with marginalized communities to make sure that there's some equity in who's getting access to the resource. Anyway, there's a good effort started on the rent assistance, but we're really hoping that the HEROES Act can come through at the volume and the length of time so that we can really get through this crisis and not have a lot of people displaced and lose their housing.
That's right. Ted, I have a question for you about exactly that in the HEROES Act, because now there's a lot of, you know, we're not able to get this through. The negotiations are ongoing. We're all getting frustrated. I'm already past the point, frankly, where I'm just thinking, look, I've spoken with all the mayors in my district. They tell me that if I just get money to the state and local governments, they will use those resources to help with housing and food programs. And so I'm wondering, as you think about this kind of skinnied down HEROES bill, which doesn't have to last as long as the first year. Like if we could get to February, that would be great. And then we could pass something new to help people. But I had a couple questions about this. Anybody can take a stab at it. Part of it is, if we got money to state and local governments, do you think that would then filter through? Second question is, a lot of the money in the CARES Act went to this enhanced unemployment. It was an extra $600 a week for people who are unemployed. If we just got that back, I'm just trying to get a sense of the scope. If we just got that back, we could make it retroactive to July 31st, helping the people who lost their jobs. Would that essentially obviate most of not all the need, because I know there are certain segments that were not helped, but would that really take a lot of pressure off of the number of people who can't pay rent? Those would be my two starting questions, because I'm always trying to find the most efficient way to help people, and I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Let me start and then make room for other people to respond. You know, we've spent a lot of time looking at the numbers, and I talked about depending on what assumptions you use, you get different numbers. One of those big assumptions is what happens with unemployment and employment in general. I do think it's true that $600 made a huge difference in mass for a lot of people. I also know, based on the numbers we're looking at and the lived experience on the ground, not only during the pandemic, but predating, a program that can really do well for 80–90% of people, there's people who are on the margins for whatever reason, especially when it comes to the unemployment system. If there isn't a focused effort that's consistent across the state, you're going to lose people at the margins. So I think both things could be true, that you could kind of get your 80% solution through kind of a larger unemployment or a more flexible fund sort of situation. But there's going to be a segment at the margins that you need to have a focused effort to have consistent success across the state with.
And when you're talking about the margins, are you talking about people who are chronically homeless, or are we talking about specific groups who were left out of the CARES assistance, like, for example, the immigrant community that was completely left out because it needed president's signature?
I think it's a little bit like when you look at homelessness in general. There's so many different ways people can get into it. It can be they were working in the informal economy, so they don't not eligible for unemployment. Could be, you know, some just difficulty with the unemployment system in general, undocumented. And so when we designed the using the CARES Act funding, the emergency rent assistance program, it's specifically designed to be able to get to be eligible to get to people at the highest need without all the barriers that, you know, we understand why those barriers are there, but at the end of the day, you're going to leave people out when you depend on sort of more complicated systems like and to be clear, this is it's also working it from a different direction. This pays rent assistance. It's paid directly to the landlords. There's engagement with landlords, so to the extent the landlord identifies an issue, they can work with the person to get the rent paid too. So it's just working it from lots of different directions. That's why I think large scale solutions are critical that work for most people, and then also having focused housing assistance to make sure that we don't leave anyone outside, that we don't push even more people. As you were saying, there was a crisis before this started. Let's work to not make it worse.
That's right. I heard a statistic recently that 1 out of 11 children in our state is facing homelessness right now, which is an astounding number. You can fact check me on that. And just for anybody listening, just to clarify, the CARES Act, we did make it so people working in the gig economy could qualify for unemployment insurance. People working part-time could also qualify, but there is a segment that's left out, kind of the cash economy that did get left out for sure. Okay, so I will then go to some of my more typical questions. Ted, we've been talking for a bit, so I'm gonna hop over to Rachel just for a moment. I'll cycle through you. Rachel, people across the state are struggling to pay rent. Can you just give us an overview of the housing challenges impacting East King and Pierce County? And you can talk about pre-COVID, currently, and even branch into whether there are specific communities. Like, we have seen that communities of color have been hit hardest medically by COVID. They've been hit hardest economically by COVID, and I presume that extends to housing. Oh, Rachel, you're muted.
How's that?